Welcome to the Help to Adjust podcast, where we discuss issues of equity, inclusion, and psychology. Queens, I think there's something in the water. We produce a lot of talented people. Today, you are going to meet a licensed clinical social worker, a trauma specialist, a certified yoga teacher, and a play therapist, someone who helps a lot of people, who I think serves this community in a great way. I would like you to meet Katiuscia Gray.
Thank you. What a great introduction. Queens is in the house.
That's right. I can't claim being born in Queens as you do, but I moved to Queens when I was 5 and consider it, my home.
Yes.
So it's good to have you. I really believe, and we as a podcast believe that people who serve the community in ways of teaching, education, therapy, that we are a bedrock of the community that often, we don't hear our stories. So I would like to know, how did you end up in this honorable field?
Wow, I love that question. So I grew up in Queens. I grew up in Hollis. Hollis is in the house.
That's right.
Born and raised in Queens. My family is Haitian American. I'm Haitian American. My family's from Haiti. They came here. My grandmother came here when she was an adult. My mom came here when she was a teenager. And so we lived in this house in Hollis where there was everybody, right? That's what Caribbean people do. They buy a house and they bring everybody up, and then everybody comes, lives in the house. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, because if you have 15 people in the house, namely, I come from a lineage of all women. I don't know how great that was. Now, there was some great moments, 1,000%. But for the most part, it was a lot of trauma. It was a lot of dysfunction. And so in growing up with that, a big part of what I saw was domestic violence, physical abuse. People didn't know how to communicate within our family. So a lot of what I saw was we just stopped speaking to each other. Mm-hmm. So we would be in the house with each other, and I would have to pass messages because she wasn't speaking to the sister today. And then in 6 months, all of a sudden they speaking to the sister, but no one resolved what we initially resolved. So it was really quite ridiculous to me. And in seeing that, and me being a trauma survivor, I come from a lot of also physical abuse and sexual abuse as a child. So in coming from that and then being raised by all this dysfunction, I was always reared, I don't know if you can say energetically, I don't know what, but I was always reared into, I want to understand the human brain. I want to understand people's psyches. I want to understand why people move the way that they do, right? Because there's always a reason behind why somebody moves the way that they move. And when I went to school, it really fascinated me. I wanted to learn more, and here I was.
Yeah, absolutely. And many of us who go into the field of psychology, clinical social work, clinical psych, we are there because we wanted to get more insight into things that affected us directly.
And I really believe as you heal on your own individual stuff, it really is like a superpower. And you get to understand people on a different level that someone doesn't quite have that experience. Like books doesn't teach you that. Books will teach you but so far.
Absolutely.
Right? But knowing trauma, and careful not to put your trauma on someone else and not to relate too much to them, but it really becomes a superpower because you do understand. And I think for me, that has helped me tremendously in my career. It has made me such an empathetic person, not sympathetic, but a very empathetic person, because I understand, and I really do.
I actually understand. Yeah, and you hit on something interesting when you said that you don't want to over relate or be in a place where you're having transference with what you're witnessing in your clients' lives. Have you seen cases of that? I know you train younger social workers.
So first of all, it happened to me a lot when I first started. So my first career was in the courthouse. We was talking about that earlier. My first career was in the courthouse, and there was so much trauma stories in the courthouse, and I was very triggered a lot. And so I just became so sympathetic to them, not empathetic, that it took so much out of me emotionally. And I would do very inappropriate things. I would give them my personal cell phone, call me when you're feeling like you want to talk to somebody, because I knew this kid didn't have anybody. And then what eventually started happening is I was running ragged. I was running on fumes, because if you don't have boundaries with people, they will call you all day and all night. And people were calling me on vacations. People were calling me in the middle of the night, suicidal. And I was a 25-year-old kid. What was I going to do with all this information? So I had to learn boundaries. So that meant that I had to go back and do my own work. And I had an amazing supervisor to also guide me and help me. And now fast forward with the people that I supervise, I constantly have to make them understand, in a sense, what is this person pulling out of you?
Right.
It's not about, because he is having his own individual issue, right? But for you to be this sympathetic, he or she is pulling something out of you, and we need to sit and process, what is this person pulling out of you? What does this remind you of? And you will instantly hear the younger therapist say, when I was younger, this was my story. This is my story. This is my story. So younger clinicians really need to do the work before they go out and work with people.
Absolutely. That is really a good way to put it. What is this person pulling out of you? So you have taken yoga, something that you are an expert in your own right, and merged it with your social work practice, and you call your practice Mind Meets Movement. Tell me more about that.
Yes. So I've been practicing yoga for, I'm going to say a little over 15 years now. I've been a therapist for over 20 years. I know I look so young.
I was about to say, you were like 12 when you started?
So I've been practicing for just about 20 years. So when I first started practicing, I was always interested in different frameworks to practice. I never wanted to be that sort of psychoanalytic, sit on the couch and blah, blah, blah. I always wanted to be a therapist that can help you and showing up as your natural self for me to help you. And that doesn't always come in the form of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. It doesn't always come. That's what we're taught, but that's not what should be done. So because I come from a lot of trauma and I come from a lot of mental health issues within my own family, when I started having my children, specifically my son, because my son was a very colicky and very sick baby, and he was always crying, and he just used to trigger me so much. And then eventually what started happening to me is I started to develop these massive headaches. And the headaches was so strong. It was to the point that I couldn't see. It was blinding headaches, pain. I just couldn't see. So I went to the doctor and I took all these tests. And I kept saying, she's going to say that I have a brain tumor because I legitimately can't see. I'm not making it up.
Sounds debilitating.
It was debilitating. It was debilitating. And so eventually I went back to her to get the results of all the tests. And I was like, okay, she's going to tell me I'm dying and I got to make arrangements for the kids. She told me, there ain't nothing wrong with you.
Nothing.
You stressed. And it was really astonishing to me to think, yo, stress can do this to your body? And then she mentioned me going to yoga. And I was like, yoga? I'm going to no yoga. Yoga is for...
So that was your start. So let's see now, how long ago was this?
This was almost 15 years ago,
Okay. Yeah,
right?
15.
So once she mentioned yoga, I'm a woman of color, and she was a white woman. The first thing that I said was, yoga? Yoga's for like skinny white women who's like, who's going to do headstands. I'm not doing that. That sounds ridiculous to me. Right? So she was like, you should give it a try. And I'm always down to give something a try before I reject things. So my first yoga class, I went with a girlfriend of mine, and I took what's called a restorative yoga class. And a restorative yoga class is a dimly lit room. They put these props behind you, these yoga big bolsters underneath your legs. She gave me some lavender oil around my temples. She put this meditative mask on me. She had these candles. She had these dimly lit candles. She had this beautiful music. And when I woke up 90 minutes later, that was the most relaxed that I have ever been in my entire life. So I was like, whatever this is, I'm going to want some more of this.
It's for me.
It's for me.
Yeah.
And so as I became more on that journey, I started to think, I think this would be so dope if I could incorporate this in therapy. So then I started adding little things in, like breathing. Let's figure out how to breathe. Because that's, a lot of us don't know how to breathe, right? Breathing, bringing yourself down, bringing your heart rate down, connecting your mind to your body. And as I started to do that with my patients, it started to become very popular. And I was like, I'm going to just go get certified. And then I got certified, and then I just was entrenched in it because it was so fascinating what the brain does and what the brain does to the body and the connection of it. And the more that I started to get intrigued by it and just started to get all this knowledge, I was like, I'm gonna start a business, right? And I'm going to incorporate those both aspects because we have to heal the mind and the body as one for true healing to happen. And then that's how I came up with Mind Meets Movement.
I definitely believe in the mind-body connection. So let's see. Did I hear that right? That social work was first and then you got into yoga a few years later for your own personal enrichment, and it became something that you knew was good. Yeah. So speak a little bit about the comfort level that particularly people of color tend to have with dance and movement versus the perhaps what I see as a distance that you alluded to, disconnected people may have from yoga and meditation.
I think it's the stigma, right? I think that there's not enough of people that look like us that are practicing. And I don't think that there's a lot of people that really know what yoga is. For some reason, there's these crazy stereotypes that, you know, we're evoking the devil because we're chanting, right? We are doing headstands on top of our head. I don't know. We're burning chickens in the yoga room. Bunch of crazy stuff. I've actually had somebody a couple of months ago say to me, I'm not going to come to your class because, you know, you could evoke the devil by chanting. A black woman, right? And so sometimes I have to refrain because I'm not here to teach every single and I'm damn sure not here to convert you, right? So How I look at it as, if we are healing the mind, don't you think that we should heal the body? I read an article a couple of weeks ago that 1 out of every 10 people go to the emergency room thinking that they're having a heart attack, and it is a panic attack. And so that really means that our bodies is talking to us. The alarm is sounding off and we are not paying attention. And I think if we could start looking at it as it's a medical issue, and if it is a medical issue, how can you just heal your mind without incorporating your body?
Right.
You call it prayer, I call it meditation, right? You call it praise and worship, I call it chanting. You call it God, I call it the divine. It's literally all the same thing. All of us is just trying to connect to something deeper than ourselves.
Those were such wonderful comparisons, to what people express as being what's for them and what people think is not for them. That's actually the same. And, a good friend of mine always says that the devil gets blamed for way too many things, because to imagine that people would think that there's something, demonish or devilish about something that they really don't know about immediately. Oh, it's the devil. That is, that's a block to growth in itself, right?
Absolutely. That's a fact. I always like to say, that meditation really is, I call it the divine, you call it God. The divine is speaking to you, right? So when you're in this silent meditation, quiet space, they're speaking to you. God, the divine, is speaking to you, right? When you are in prayer, you are speaking to the divine or God. And when we chant, that's what we're doing. That's literally what we're doing. You hold your prayer beads, I hold my mala beads. It's the same thing. So why are we so rigid in saying it has to just be this way? Why? Says who? Why does it have to be that way?
So give me a little bit about the experiences that doing yoga, therapy, meditation with people. What are some of the experiences that you have witnessed in terms of people's growth?
Yeah. So a caveat on that is that this is advertised for me everywhere. So if you are coming to the practice, you already know that this is what we're doing. So there's no surprises, there's no punches, there's none of that. Now, do not get me wrong. I'm not chanting or anything like that in the practice, but you already know this is what you're coming for. And so how I do it is I weave it in. I don't necessarily give it to them on the first day. A big part of my practice is we do a lot of psychoeducation. We do a lot of connections. We do a lot of going back into psychoanalyst, right? We do CBT. We do play. I always say this to everyone that comes to the practice, specifically to see me, that I am not your average therapist, right? So we're going to be using all these different skills to figure yourself out, right? And so the whole idea of you coming here is so we could figure out why you moving in the world like this, right? And, I'm from Hollis, so you're going to get an F-bomb every so often. You going to get, girl, you wildin' every so often. You're going to get all of that, right? And they love it because it makes me and the practice more relatable. They understand I'm from where they're from. So after the psychoeducation and the psychoanalytics, and we go back and we figure out your trauma and we figure out what things are connected to, then that's when the real work starts. Okay, so now let's start utilizing some coping skills. right? And so my favorite coping skill that I always use to teach people about the mind-body connection is a gingerbread man. So I legitimately go on the ground with them and we draw out a gingerbread person. And then I go, this is you. This is gingerbread you. We have inside of our body called an internal fire alarm, right? Just like a fire alarm in your house. It warns you and it tells you, yo, there's some smoke in here. You better go check this out. Your body tells you the exact same thing. You're not paying attention. So we legitimately go through the whole body. We start from their head and we go all the way down to their body, to their feet. And I have them color their head, if it's racing thoughts, if their head gets hot, and then I have them write it. After we go through the whole body, then we start processing. How does it feel? I'm going to say 99% of the people say, I never really connected me biting my nails was related to my anxiety. I didn't know when my thoughts start racing, there's a sign of my anxiety acting up. So it gives them a better connection of their mind and body. And then from there, we start figuring out, well, what's the first thing you notice? Because that's the alarm. That's the beep. If we can catch it at the small alarm, right, we'll be able to not have it transition into the big fire alarm. And that big fire alarm is when you on 100. And when you on 100, what do? You go curse somebody out. You're going to want to hurt somebody. You beat somebody up. We can't catch it by then. So then that's when we incorporate the breathing, the favorite scripture, calm word, visualization, holding on to beads, holding on to a stress ball. So you see, I get a little slick with it. I weave in some of these things without them really thinking that it's yoga per se.
I love it. I love it. That is wonderful. So you literally have a symbol for the person's body in the form of this gingerbread body, and people are getting in touch with what they're feeling in their own organism.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it works like a charm all the time. Mm-hmm. All the time. It never fails.
Are you able to do this stuff virtually?
I can. Yeah. So whatever I do in the office, I can do virtually as well. Obviously, with the littler kids, it's a little bit more harder. But for the most part, yes, it could transition. I'm not that good with computer and tech, but my daughter helps me with creating, like, I know there's like these virtual worlds, and we was doing that a lot. But now I'm fully back in the office. Mm-hmm. So I really don't do virtual anymore.
So how many do your folks who work with you or under you do virtual while you're in the office? So
they have the option, because now we're actually back to hybrid. So I transitioned everybody back to hybrid. And that's because we're a practice that specializes in kids, and most often kids don't do well virtually. Mm-hmm. So they have the option of doing some virtual, right, for the older kids and for the older people. But for the younger kids, they have to be in the office. Because that's where we have all our tools. That's where we have our games and activities. And, for the kids and the teenagers, their parents are listening in. They don't have privacy. Right. They don't really want to talk. It's just a lot more easier and comfortable in the office.
Yeah. During COVID, there was a lot of transition happening with people who were used to coming to the office that had to start doing virtual sessions. People were, because of the privacy issue, people were going to their car, sitting in their car during the session. People were, closing the door to the room saying, do not knock on this door. I'm doing my session, finding whatever way they could to have their private time.
And that's hard, right? Like, you're used to being vulnerable and talking and maybe crying and connecting, but now you got to feel like you on guard because so and so's gonna walk in the room. Yeah, I had a couple of people that didn't have any privacy, and they would be at the McDonald's with their head be whispering. And I'd be like, yeah, but I can't hear you.
Like a little secret agent type of thing. Go ahead, Katiuscia, I'm listening. So tell me about some of the work you do in schools.
So we do a lot of work in the schools. Generally, recently, we just got a contract with the local Valley Stream School District where we go into the schools now and we teach kids. We don't say mental health because, you know, that's like a word people don't like.
People associated with breakdowns, you know.
Breakdowns and, you know, your hair sticking up in the air, right? So we say mental wellness.
Right.
So we go in and we have some after school programs where we do group work, where we talk about the mind-body connection, where we talk about stress, we talk about anxiety, we talk about trauma, we talk about how it's not therapy, it's group therapy. So how can you develop some skills on your own, like breathing, right? And we're weaving in some games and some activities, how to communicate. Our young people don't know how to communicate, specifically with these texts. So much My daughter was just into a crazy argument 2 months ago and had it out with her best friend.
She's a teenager.
She's graduating this year. And I was like, but she was raised by a therapist, so she knows how to communicate. But I was like, I don't really think that he meant that on text. You should go talk to him. And she did. But generally, kids don't do that. You know what they do? They go fight. They don't know how to communicate. And so many things get lost in text.
Absolutely.
So many things get lost in because they have anxiety. Now, all of a sudden, she looked at me. She's like, oh, she want to fight me. No, she didn't. She just looked at you. Right? Right? So we don't know. They've lost the art of communicating. So we're trying real hard on that level to teach them how to communicate, teach them conflict resolution, teach them about anxiety and worry, and that when they do feel like it's too much, how to ask for help, how to seek help.
What are the ages you're working with in schools?
So right now, our first contract is with the high school.
Okay.
We're working on the middle school next.
That's wonderful.
So we can go all the way down to 5. I work with 5-year-olds. That's always been my area of expertise. Yeah.
I mean, the text messaging is something because, you know, kids, young children, my son is 11. He's on Discord, all these different sites. And I have talked to adult couples who are saying, you know, they're explaining in the sessions their conversation. Well, you know, I laughed, but he didn't say anything. And so when he didn't say anything, you know, I figured that he was, you know, thinking it wasn't funny. And I'm like, why is it not funny? And so when you're talking to people and then they say, no, this wasn't face-to-face, this was text message. I'm like, oh, so you really didn't talk about this. You know, you were sending messages back and forth. Well, yeah, but I laughed, and that's LOL or the emoji with the tears coming out. And it is not the same. It is not the same as having a conversation.
I agree.
I think you're right that there is some lost art to conversation. You know, there's even situations where people are in the same room with each other and they're shooting each other messages.
Can you get me a bottle of water out of the refrigerator, please? What?
Or even worse, like, did you go in the other room and talk to mommy yet? And they're sitting across from each other, you know, so.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I feel like it's ridiculous. And most people, I actually was talking about this morning, most people do not know how to communicate. And I think it has a lot to do with communication to people is connected to, if I tell you how I feel, which is me being vulnerable, you're going to slap me up. You're not going to hear me. You're not going to respect me. You're not going to blah, 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 blah. So I'm not going to say anything. but then I don't know how you feel. It's
Right.
like,
And then you're going to be infuriated if I don't react appropriately to what you are feeling, but you won't say what you're feeling.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I say to the kids and my adults, are you a mind reader? Because I know I damn sure, unless you got some sort of special skill that I don't know about. And if you do, you need to come in this office and make us some money.
Exactly.
But if you are legitimately not a mind reader, you cannot tell me or the other person what they was thinking based on their face. You just cannot.
Right.
You have to be able to say, what were you thinking? Are you okay? And let them answer.
Right. And if you, I mean, and this is my observation, when you read what people say to each other in text messages, people say very serious things and they say LOL because, they kind of thinking that it's not the right thing for you to have done. So you did such and such LOL. And then, and it's like, you're really losing a lot in translation there.
And do you see? No conflict resolution. I'm saying LOL because I don't want a conflict. I don't want a problem. So I'm going to say blah, something serious, but then I'm going to follow up with an LOL. But that wasn't an LOL. You was
Right.
dead ass serious.
Right. And then in the same way, when people are talking out loud to each other and we're trying to teach them communication skills, it's what you said. Say what you actually were feeling versus, just saying something that's trying to keep you from being vulnerable. Because when you try to keep yourself from being vulnerable, you're actually blocking the potential communication that's there.
There you go. That's the therapist in you. All facts. That's all facts. And I wish people could understand that, specifically our younger people. But we're going to do what we can do, one kid at a time.
What can we do as a therapeutic community and as a community in general to bridge the gap that is getting less, but to still bridge the gap with services like counseling, like what you're doing with yoga, meditation, affirmation therapy? What can we do to make this more accessible to people of color?
I think that people of color have to see us. I think having podcasts like this, conversations like this, going out into the community, going out into churches. I know that's a hard one, but going out into churches, going out into schools, letting people see us, right? Because typically they don't see us. Typically who they see is, and there's nothing wrong with them, but typically who they see is a white woman. You don't see too many white men. Occasionally you will, but generally you will see the majority is white therapists. I mean, you know this, we're only like 2% of the population as therapists. 2%.
It's quite remarkable.
That's like nothing. If there's like 1 million people in this world and we're 2% to help treat people.
When I started doing this work in Valley Stream about 12 years ago, 2010, we would look at the directories of who was practicing in the community, and a lot of the people were over 70, were white, were female, and sometimes we would call people to see how we could collaborate, and these people weren't even practicing anymore. It was really remarkable. And then the insurance companies would say, "Oh, we're flooded in your area. We don't have any, room for new mental health clinicians."
Exactly. Which makes no sense at all. And, that's another barrier. And I feel really bad for our community because they can't afford our rates. Lots of people who look like us, they can't afford $200 a week. And I understand that and I get that, right? But a lot of these insurance companies make it impossible for us to be paneled. And then when we are paneled, the reimbursement rates are so low and so insulting. And guess who has those insurances? People that look like us. So we're not taking them because we can't take your insurance because the rates is too horrible. So where are they going to go? They're going to go to a clinic with people that don't look like us, with people who probably don't give two damns about them. It's just a whole crazy cycle. And I don't know the solution. But I do say this, we can do what we can do. And I'm very proud of the work that we are doing and the insurances, the low reimbursement rates that we are on. That's our contribution because at the end of the day, we also have to make a living. We also have to take care of ourselves.
Correct. I mean, I try to hire therapists sometimes, and when we offer people $35 or $40 an hour, they say, "Well, what do you want me to do with that?" But if we're getting $60 an hour and paying rent and what it costs to be in business, then it can be very difficult, you know. But I agree with you. It's great work, and I think that what we're doing is very important. So, any last remarks before we close?
So, for everyone that is listening to this podcast, I have a free ebook on my website, Mind Movement Counseling. All you have to do is put in podcast, and you will be able to get the free ebook. It's about 5 pages where I have movement and mental health information for you.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
I really want people to take away that, yes, therapy is great, right? But if there's only 2% of us in this community, you're going to have to seek alternative ways for you to heal. You're going to have to. And so maybe in the interim, you do go to a yoga class. Maybe in the interim, you do go to a kickboxing class or a spin class or Pilates, which is all the things I do, by the way, to release that stress out of your body. And you hear people say after they leave the gym, "Oh my God, I feel so good," because the endorphins has been released out of your mind. So even if you don't want to try yoga, move your body.
Absolutely.
Move your body, and that will help alleviate the stress while you're waiting for a therapist. And we don't know how long that's going to be because we're in a crisis and our wait list is crazy. But you can do something.
Yeah. Katiuscia, it was an absolute pleasure to have you. So much insight, so much wisdom, and the what you do does make a difference. Katiuscia Gray, Mind Meets Movement. We will talk again soon. Please like, share, and subscribe. Press that notification button. We will connect soon. Peace and love all.